nightlife. So I owned and operated nightclubs in the early 2000s. I opened my first dive bar in 20, which was just a cash cow. I was the victim of early success, which led to later struggle. Then after being in nightlife for so long, I opened Pru and Proper in downtown Los Angeles, which is Michelin-rated fine dining. Ultimately
Nice.
when the Michelin Guide came back, which was probably my greatest professional achievement and simultaneously like the most painful learning process I had ever gone through ever in my life. And then we spun that out into a fast casual, which taught me that I hate fast casual. And I would argue fast casual hates me too. Just a completely different customer, different style of service. So we ended
Mhm.
up exiting that business pretty quickly. Um, so that's kind of the background there. So let's start with
Cool.
your
Well,
background.
my background, I'm like so many probably restaurateurs, maybe yourself even, that you fell in love with it in high school. I don't know if you worked in a restaurant when you were in high school, but I worked in a restaurant in my hometown in Monmouth County, New Jersey, and it was the place where I felt the most invigorated, the most like I felt like I belonged, especially being Asian in a non-Asian community and being in high school where I hadn't really grown up in that high school. We'd moved around and it was you know, it was a place where I didn't really connect with that many people. The restaurant was a place where I felt very much like the part of the family and everybody working on the team to kind of, make an experience. And that's where I fell in love with restaurants. I always loved food and I loved taking care of people and service because my mother was an incredible entertainer, but it was the restaurant where I really felt like I really want to pursue this as a career. And of course, that was disappointing to my parents. And I tried every which way to kind of maneuver into it. But I came to Philadelphia to go to college and pretty much never left and spent most of my 20s trying to figure out how to make that dream come true, even though I was
Let's
working
talk
in other
about that.
industries.
Let's talk about that because for me, that was a life hack. Same deal, right? Like the first time I walked into a bar, I was 17 years old in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and I didn't I didn't see the people on the floor. I saw the bartenders. And when I saw the bar,
Mhm.
I saw a stage. And I was like, this is for me. And if someone was to ask me, like, what is the greatest professional life hack there is? It's like for a select few of us, we know what we're going to do from a very young age. And again, whether you venture out into other industries or not, and I certainly did myself for a short time, you always know where you're going to land. And everything is kind of leading you in that general direction. It's one thing to work in our industry. It's another thing to aspire to become a restaurateur. What inspired that in you? Were there models that you saw that seemed inspirational?
Well, for me, I feel like it's almost like a piece of art. Restaurants are an experience and it's a sensual experience in terms of the food that you eat, the sound that you hear, the visual that you see, the people who are there on stage. And I'm a little bit of a creative person, so I always saw it as that. I don't know that I was necessarily thinking I'm going to kill it as a financial investment or um, that I aspired to be a restaurateur as my career path, but I love the idea of creating this idea and making a place for people to feel comfortable and at home. And that's what inspired me.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the transition there, if there was a transition. So, samesies. When I got into it, it wasn't about money; it was about glory. You know, I wanted to create something great. I wanted to dedicate it to the community. And what I found, especially in those early years as a restaurateur, was that profit was an obligation. I know it was like the shameful thing in our industry to actually make money, but I equated profit with impact. I needed to make money and I needed to make more money because I wanted to do more things. And what stifled my ability to double down and host amazing community events and give away things for free in a way that didn't bankrupt the company. All of it came down to a function of profitability. So was there a moment in your career where it went from being about the glory to being about the glory and the impact?
You can't have glory if the place can't stay open. And the place can't stay open if there's not a surplus of cash coming in, because at some point you'll burn out of all the cash. So I would say that it's a necessity, not a preference, that everybody needs to care about profitability, because there's no way that you can last more than 3 months if you just don't care about where you're at, or just dumb luck. And that is a major challenge. And, you hear so many stories about how restaurants only have a 1 year life, that 50% of restaurants close within a year, or that the margins are razor thin. All those things that you hear about restaurants doesn't deter anybody, because even during the pandemic, people were opening restaurants despite the fact of knowing how financially challenging it is. So there's something there that just causes us all to like love this industry, but you have to make a surplus, otherwise it's going to be a really difficult road.
I find the optimism and I possess it myself. I find it so inspiring. I joke all the time. I say, most new restaurants open in closed restaurants. you know, it's
True.
it's it's the great irony of our business. Most aren't fresh builds, right? And so that being the case, there have to be these differentiating factors between those that consistently succeed and those that intermittently fail. In your mind, as a student of the industry yourself, what's the delta? What are the differences between intermittently succeeding and succeeding with consistency?
Well, one thing is, I think that there has to be a roadmap. I mean, you can be as creative as you want, use the best ingredients that you want, or you could have a model that's like, I like to use your example of a dive bar. A dive bar still has a vision, but if you aren't in the right place, you aren't open the right hours, whatever your business decision making is, if it doesn't work, there's something amiss with it. So if you don't have a roadmap, you have to at least have a roadmap to say, I'm sticking with this, and not just be all over the place. Because when you're all over the place, money tends to be harder to keep track of. And if it's unfocused, I think you're not making a statement to anybody, and it can be really challenging. But having a roadmap is essential. Being able to control the creative impulses that we all have. I mean, even as a dive bar, and I'm not even saying Michelin starred restaurant or not, dive bar, if you just have bartenders who want everything, it's like candy and the liquor. The liquor list is like, what's the saying? Candy and, the whatever in the candy store. You see all these different things that you could get, and you're buying them, but not necessarily able to convert them into something that's of value to your customer. That ultimately is the reason why businesses fail, because you're not offering something that's of value, whether it's price to whatever, people not willing to pay the price, or people not wanting the product, whatever it is, it has to be something that people want to spend the money on. Otherwise, you're dead in the water.
What you're talking about specifically is product market fit. In my mind, when we look at the success or failure of any restaurant, it really comes down to two things, right? Product market fit. And if you've achieved that, then it's just about awareness. Like if you have what they want, then you just need to let them know, because there is no, and Lord knows I tried this for so many years. There's no manufacturing demand. Either people want it or they don't. And so as you've opened multiple concepts in multiple tiers over the years, what does that product market fit engine look like for you? How do you guys decide whether this is right for this particular community?
Well, it's so interesting because, you could look at it in so many different ways, but the bottom line is you have to have enough customers to field your concept. And the more niche your concept is, the more people you need to be able to attract, because it may or may not be a multiple time experience depending on what your concept is. So what I found is that although I don't want to appeal, no one can appeal to everybody, but you might have to make something on the menu that is a compromise, that is not one your most creative thing, but it's something that when a table of four comes in and one person wants Michelin style whatever, and one person is a steak and potatoes person, or one person is vegetarian, you have to create that product mix that at least can attract a broader quantity of people, because otherwise it's very difficult to accommodate people when you're that niche. So we don't have any super niche restaurants. Fork, our flagship restaurant, it's a, for lack of a better word, restaurant focused on sourcing and farm to table and about American cuisine. And it's more about the service and hospitality than it is necessarily the food. So if you're taking people out, you have a special occasion, you don't want it to fail. Fork is a place that you can rely on, that you know you're going to have a 98% in terms of food service and, just overall experience. High Street is a little bit different. It's more about bread, something that I'm super passionate about, but I realize that I am nixing all the gluten-free people out, so I have to have gluten-free options. And, obviously that makes total sense. I mean, nobody can just be 100% everything unless you're small. And, there are certainly, Philadelphia is a city where the barrier to entry is really low. You can open up a 20-seat restaurant, a 30-seat restaurant, and you can do it. You can live your dream. But if you want to grow, 20 seats is really hard to get out of, because it's hard to afford a liquor license. It's hard to afford management and team members. You're basically a one-man show. So if you want to get from small little 20-seater to 60-seater, I had the luxury of, when I opened at 68 seats, and I was able to raise enough money to build out a restaurant of that size, but a lot of people can't.
Let's go back to Fork for a second, because I'm sure that some people that are unfamiliar with the concept will listen to your description of the concept and say, "What a square. I'm not here to, just do the do. Like, I'm here to innovate. I'm here to change the world." When the reality is that restaurateurs prize innovation, but restaurant customers prize consistency. They want to
That's
know
right.
that you're reliable. And I don't think there are enough conversations happening around consistency. Um, Despite how you described it, it was one of the top 100 restaurants America can afford to lose. Um, you
Well,
know,
we've had 5 chefs over 25 years, and I am not a chef. So therefore, to create consistency, it's about creating the value, about creating the hospitality vision, about creating the feeling of consistency, because over 5 chefs, they're all different. I mean, I can't force any of them to cook the other person's food. They're all cooking their own food, but they all have to operate within that vision and that sandbox value propositions. I think that people who want to push the limits of creativity, remember, creativity comes with a cost. It comes with sometimes higher labor costs, sometimes higher ingredient costs. And that all goes into your business model of deciding whether or not you have enough of a market to feed into your concept. And people who are overly ambitious, like if you want to do that super high end concept, most likely it can't be in a 100-seat restaurant, because a 100-seat restaurant, to occupy, to fill, to pay the rent on that amount of space, you have to have a really big audience. So those two things may or may not, I'm not saying it can never happen, but it depends on the marketplace you're in. Maybe in Philadelphia it can't work, but in Chicago it can work. Or in a suburb of Philadelphia it could work. But only if you do the math and do the homework and the research and what is actually happening in that marketplace do you really understand what it could be.
One of the things that I talk about a lot with my clients is this marketing concept of jobs to be done. Are you familiar?
Yeah, well, you can. Well, actually, I want to hear your version of jobs to be done, and then I'll tell you my version of jobs to
Sure,
be done.
sounds good. So the idea is this is that it's not a restaurant that nobody's going to you to eat because they can eat at home. Your restaurant serves a specific purpose in their life, that it's a specific use case. You know, at my fine dining restaurant, it was about revelry. Like we were there to celebrate every major occasion in your life, and you could trust us to do so. At the dive bar, we were an antidote to loneliness. Like when I described the bar to other people, I said, this is a bar you can go to by yourself. And you'll meet the bartenders, they'll become your friends, they'll introduce you to the other regulars at the bar. Like that was the job. So like in
Mhm.
no way have I described food or beverage. Like that's not our job. Our job is experience. And so, one of the questions that I ask a lot, and I think you're talking about it as it relates to product market fit, is what is the job of your restaurant? Because ultimately that's
Mm,
going to determine frequency. And frequency is the name of the game. In fine dining, frequency, no matter how good of a job you do, customers are infrequent. The people that can afford to come all the time can afford to go other places. So they do.
right. True.
Um, and so it's all a function of that in my mind. How about you?
I could definitely relate to that. I was thinking more about jobs to be done on a labor perspective because you can create as many jobs to be done, but whether or not they support your mission or not is another question. But in terms of jobs to be done, yes, I agree that each restaurant serves a specific purpose. And that purpose, it's funny because having a restaurant group, and especially with concepts that are a little bit similar, there is sibling rivalry. And when one sees one doing really well at something, then they automatically want that for themselves. But you have to differentiate and you have to kind of stay in your lane because there are a certain number of customers who like our style of hospitality and food and service. And maybe that is a limited audience as well. Definitely have to take that into consideration. I love your dive bar that you are a solution for loneliness because the Fork Bar, for example, is a place where people have come and meet people and it's very convivial. Even though it's in a gorgeous dining room, people feel comfortable. People feel like they belong, that they're going to meet people with a similar kind of vision of themselves. That is something that it does. And then the rest of the dining room continues to be special occasion, people celebrating, people doing deals, people, you know, it's definitely on the higher end side. High street hoagies, that's a solution to your lunch problem. But that's the one we have the most struggle with because our vision of a lunch problem might not be the same vision as a bunch of students. We're in a student food hall and we're finding that that is maybe not, we are not connecting the dots on that and whether or not we just need to move it because we have a version of that at High Street Bakery where it's killing it, where the students are residents of a university hospital who maybe have more spending income or want a more sophisticated product. Our hoagies are delicious, but they are $15 where maybe undergraduates only want to spend 8 or 9. And maybe that's a disconnect.
Let's unpack that because I think that there are a lot of people that are in that position today, right? Wondering, do I need to pivot this concept or do I need to take it out back and shoot it? And so, and we go back and forth with this. I mean, I don't know about you, but I can tell you that, my life has been defined professionally by either giving up too quick or not giving up quick enough. Right.
Right, yeah.
Like I would say that, that ultimately is the hurdle for so many of us. And sometimes you're able to make one or two pivots and the whole thing turns around. And then sometimes
Hmm.
it's just a slog in perpetuity.
Yeah.
How do you delineate in your mind? Like, and maybe for this specific concept, but maybe generally, like, when do you know that there is an opportunity here? And when do you know that it's time to just take the loss?
Probably in the slog category because I'm optimistic. I always feel like I could turn it around. But
Sure.
as an entrepreneur, you're a risk taker, and you have to understand that everything that you do, no matter how successful you've been in the past, or how good of a student you are, or how great you are with people, that every entrepreneurial venture, whether it's consulting, whether it's opening a restaurant, has a risk to it. Maybe being a consultant has less risk, and restaurant ownership definitely has high risk. But there is a possibility that you could fail or that you can't turn it around. And I was in a situation where I tried everything I possibly could to turn a situation around, and I couldn't do it. And the bottom line was that maybe it was bad timing, maybe it was bad luck, maybe it was nothing that had to do with me, because, you know, the amount of attention that the concept got, the amount of reviews, positive feedback that we received, but we could never make it work. And the rent turned out to just be too high
Yeah.
for the concept that we had. And so there was nothing that I could do, but I just kept trying and trying and trying and bleeding and bleeding and bleeding. And then finally, I knew that I just couldn't keep it up and pulled the plug. And that was probably 3 years too late, maybe even 4 years too late, or 5 years too late. Who knows?
Well, the problem in my mind isn't it's not the money, it's the time.
Right.
It's
Yeah,
understanding as an entrepreneur that like your most valuable asset is your time. It's your focus, you know?
that's right. And
And
one of my investors said to me right out from the gate, maybe you should just try to make money someplace else. And that was an incredible piece of advice, which I didn't take. But when I look back, I remember it clear as a bell, sitting in his office and him telling me, you know what? Maybe this is cut your losses early and like move on to something else that could make money. And in retrospect, in my career, that was a lesson well learned.
you know, in my consulting practice, what has made me a much better entrepreneur is like seeing my life through other lives lived, you know, and seeing, you know, helping people avoid the mistakes that I made because Lord knows I made so many. And when I look at the tenure of my career, what I see ultimately is that the greatest determinant of professional success is the ability to not focus on what is broken in your business, but to focus on where the momentum is and to double down on that. And as you build a restaurant group, which I would assume a bunch of people that listen to this show have or aspire to have, there's always this opportunity for distraction, for lack of focus, because this little thing over here needs so much love and attention and work, as opposed to looking at these machines that are incredibly profitable. That if we
Mhm,
just put a little more gas in those tanks, it would change everything.
mhm.
How has that played out in your own life?
Well, it's really easy to be distracted these days with everything, the phone. You know, actually, I'm trying to create space for myself because you need the mental space to be able to think clearly. Otherwise, you start forgetting everything. So definitely need to do some spring cleaning every so often, every spring at least. Once you look at what you're spending time on and deciding what is working and what isn't working, and whether or not your organization needs to be reorganized to be more effective, whether or not, and I love what you just said about momentum, because when the momentum is going, that's the thing that like has the most opportunity. So, you know, don't don't keep focusing on the thing that just sucks up all your time. Focus on the thing that's going to create more opportunity for the rest of the team so that you can grow and continue moving forward. That sometimes can be really hard and emotional, because the thing that you love the most, I mean, the first one is always
Sure.
the baby. And if the baby is, we all have to recognize that concepts have a timeline, how long a product life cycle is. In dog years or restaurant years, fork is like ancient.
Oh, for
Is it,
sure. It's
how
incredible.
do you keep, or do you keep evolving it and changing it? And, I think after thinking about that over the past several months, I decided that there is a need for it because, you know, for the city of Philadelphia, I feel that there is no place that you can still go to get that same experience. So it's still worth it. And I feel like it has at least another 10 years to go.
Let's talk about Philadelphia generally. So I moved to Los Angeles in like and I would say Los Angeles is this beautiful culinary destination today. But it was a food desert when I moved there, right? Because we hadn't pulled all the chefs from New York yet. And now I'm seeing this resurgence south in San Diego that they're beginning to pull chefs from Los Angeles down to improve the culinary scene here. But you look at Philadelphia and you say that like when you opened Fork, Philadelphia certainly wasn't the food destination that it is today. And that you guys really set the stage for that. Talk to me about building something that the community needs and isn't asking for. How do you do that in a way that resonates and resonates for as long as it has?
Apparently, they did need it because at the time that Fork opened, like you said, it was culinary scene was not what it was. So there was high-end dining like Le Bec Fen, which was premier French restaurant, and then there was like BYOB, which is what I was saying earlier that anybody can open. So mom and pop shop versus like high-end French dining. What's in between? There was nothing in
Sure.
between. So I was able to fit in there as the in between. But as time moved forward, there were economic changes like 9/9, then to a major economic crisis. And so over those years, we were able, because we were in the middle, we were able to kind of morph into things that people wanted or didn't want. And so at some points, Fork was the highest end dining experience that you could have. Maybe not like La Croix or like that type of dining, but for kind of casual upscale dining, it was a little bit, on the more edgy side. It achieved 4 stars from, or 4 bells from the Philadelphia Inquirer critic, and that was in year 15. So, and then as chef-driven restaurant movement kind of continued to escalate, we were able to ride that wave. But, after the pandemic, we had to really think about what is it that people are looking for. And I felt that people were looking for someplace that they felt comfortable, belonging, not necessarily, they were looking for the community, not
Yeah.
necessarily the high-end dining, or they're definitely not looking for comfort food because they've been doing that the whole time. But now, as things are starting to return in Philadelphia, I'm feeling like when you look at Fork and people go by saying that's a really nice restaurant, this is exactly how I felt in 2000, that there's an opportunity to keep pushing that envelope forward. And we certainly have the service staff to be able to succeed in that market. And that's why I'm doing the renovation. I want to be able to push that. So that's how over 25 years I've been able to kind of morph, evolve, pivot, if you really want to use that word. I wouldn't say pivot because we didn't really pivot during the pandemic, but how I've thought about my market and where I stand relative to other restaurants in the industry.
One of the most educational and arguably painful facets of my career is that I flirted with other tiers of dining. Once I felt like I achieved some semblance of mastery, I wanted to dive headfirst into other tiers of dining. I would argue you've had a similar path. Talk to me about what you've learned about fine dining from casual dining and what you've learned about casual dining from fast casual. Because what I found is all of the lessons kind of blend together, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. So our first kind of dip into more casual dining was just expanding next door to Fork, little cafe called Fork Etc., which was all prepared foods, all baked products. We had this bistro table in the middle of the room, which was awesome because we eventually started using the space for dining as a private dining room for receptions. People loved it because it was just kind of relaxed. And that space could never become a restaurant for whatever reason. It was like it was really frustrating because we tried everything. And also, like, the chefs could not understand prepared foods. Prepared foods are a totally different animal than plated food. And so you almost have to have an additional team
Yeah.
focused on prepared foods and food to go because they're just not the same. And but I'm so thankful I did it because we evolved Fork Etc. into High Street, and High Street suffered from some of the same things that we had learned from Fork Etc. in that people kept thinking it was a daytime thing or a nighttime thing, and they couldn't see it as being either or. They could only see it as one or the other. And that's a really interesting component because if you're open for breakfast, people don't see you as a nighttime option. If you're open for dinner, people don't see you as a breakfast option. Like an all-day cafe, although we helped coin the word all-day cafe, it's a really hard proposition. And you have to remember, diners are an all-day cafe. Coffee shops are an all-day cafe. Now there are bars that are all-day cafes. It's almost like ubiquitous, like farm to table. But what we learned from Fork Etc. was that it's really hard to like everything to everybody. So when we turned into High Street and it was immediately successful in the daytime, it's kind of weird because like Fork Etc. was successful in the daytime but never at nighttime. And then when we opened in New York, people kept coming up to me and saying, "Hey, when are you opening for dinner?" But yet we insisted on opening for lunch. That was like something that I wish I could have like wheeled backwards because I didn't
Sure.
realize that New York was such a dinner market. You have to have dinner and you have to have a bar. And yet we ripped out the bar because we thought it should be focused on food and bread. So we didn't listen to our learnings. And then during the pandemic, when we had to move out of High Street, we opened a small version of High Street that was completely to go and take out. And it is extremely popular, but there was no option for dine-in. And so now we opened the dine-in version of it, but it's so hard to get the team to kind of be able to manage both. It's really hard. So still trying to take those learnings and figure it all out.
Last year, the James Beard Foundation awarded you the award for Outstanding Restaurateur. In your mind, what qualities make for an outstanding restaurateur?
Well, there's so many talented restaurateurs, and for whatever reason, I was noticed last year. And I think that a lot of it has to do with the work that we do outside of the restaurant and how we're using the restaurant and the group's platform to transform other things. Like, we started a project called Wonton Project, which, I didn't know what a ghost kitchen was. And my solution to a problem is try as many different things as you can, see what sticks. And so during the pandemic, when Fork was closed, I was teetering around in the kitchen trying to figure out whether I could turn my mother's wonton recipes into a ghost kitchen concept. And ultimately, that's what we landed on because it doesn't have a storefront and you can only order to go and delivery. But the Wonton Project became a response to AAPI discrimination and hate. And then also Sisterly Love Collective is something that I'm super passionate about and, try to get our team involved as much as possible. But it's really to elevate the voices of women in business, particularly those in the food and hospitality space, but we do work with other women as well, but really trying to elevate and help them grow because, even now, after so many years of being a woman restaurateur, when I go to a meeting that's about business, I'm still the minority in the room. And it's very hard to access capital if you don't know what to do. And women don't necessarily have that support system of knowing who they can ask. They don't necessarily have mentors that, because they are a minority in the field. I think that there are a lot of women who work in the industry, but in leadership positions or particularly in ownership, they are still a minority. And I think what women have realized is that food is an opportunity. And so many people during the pandemic decided, I don't want to be what I was doing before. I want to try to I want to run my life the way that I want to. And maybe food is an opportunity to do that.
I think one of the other things you're leading the charge on is gratuity. And I think that you've taken a really novel, a really bold position. For us, we moved to a whole house pool, which was painful, as I'm sure you can imagine. We lost like a third of the staff in doing it across 2 floors in a 6,000 square foot restaurant. But it was the right thing to do. And then, I had Saru on the show from One Fair Wage ages ago. And, that was what really opened my eyes to like how unfair gratuity is, how bad it is, how unhealthy it is, how negative it is for the industry at large. And I walked away from that thinking, man, somebody should really do something about that. Not raising
Right.
my hand to do it because, again, it's a difficult conversation to have because even though I don't think anyone loves it, a lot of people seem to like it, or at least they say they do, or at least they act like they
Right.
do. And if we go back to what we had discussed earlier, momentum is a powerful thing. Momentum in a positive direction or momentum in a negative direction. And there's a lot of momentum around gratuity, um,
Mm-hmm.
despite the facts, despite the evidence. And so for you to make really bold choices around it when, we've seen like, huge Goliaths like Union Square Hospitality Group, you know, pivot on, the initial initiatives. How did you make the practice sustainable? And what did that process look like?
Well, first of all, I just want to say that pooling is something that I've always believed in because for me, it's all the things that Saru represents: fair wages, reducing the opportunity for discrimination, all those things that come with eliminating tipping. Of course, I believe in everyone, no matter what business you're in, has to motivate their team in some way to be a team, to push forward. And so, especially in California, where it already has arrived, the minimum wage is really makes it difficult to operate a restaurant where labor is, I'm sure labor is now your top line item.
Oh, for sure.
So that makes it extremely difficult. I've always believed in pooling. I've always believed in benefits and professionalization of the industry. And so for me, tipping and gratuities can be very subjective to the person. And so by adding a service charge, to me, what I'm saying to the public is I have confidence that my product deserves 20. And so I am delivering a high service quality experience and my team deserves 20%. That was the first step, especially at Fork where we have been in business for so long with the pooled model. I think it would be really difficult to pull the plug and say, guess what, guys, we're no longer a tipping model anymore. And especially being in a state where the minimum wage is ridiculously low. In Pennsylvania and Texas, I believe the minimum wage is still $7 an hour. There's no incentive in Pennsylvania really to try this, but I see it coming down the line. And so I just want to be prepared. And I'm in a position right now with um, with my business that I can afford to try it. And so I think that that's why I was willing to, take one of my businesses and try it. So the first step was I have one restaurant that is 100 old school tipping, which is a service charge model where we add 20%. We still split that amongst the front of the house team. But on the days when the differential between the back and the front is just too large, for example, on Thanksgiving when the back of the house spent all their time making turkey, which is not something we do on a regular basis, and they help create the experience in a sorry,
You're good.
walk-in just turned on. The back of the house participate in creating the experience by creating a unique menu or whatever. I pay everybody the minimum wage and I tip out the back of the house so that that gap isn't so egregious. For example, like an hour versus whatever your normal rate of pay is,
Sure.
$20 an hour. So that's how I use that at Fork. The High Street, we decided that we were going to go the complete opposite direction, which is it's not hospitality included. It is still service charge 20, but the service charge is used to support the wages of the entire team, including the front of house making anywhere between 18 and 30 some dollars an hour. So by creating a system where people have different rates of pay based on their actual performance. So if you're a bartender and you also can wait on tables, maybe you're $28 an hour. If you are a certified level 1 sommelier, maybe you're $29 an hour. If you're a support person, maybe you're anywhere between $18 and $24 an hour. So based on your level of experience and pay, that you're paid an hourly rate. What we're finding in that model is that it's really hard to motivate people. So whether it's busy or slow, people are like, well, I'm doing the best I can, and we're not seeing that level of motivation. We're trying. So we're trying to motivate people with like additional incentives. Of course, some being financial, some being just experiential, have a glass of wine after work. But we also want to experiment with something more like a commission structure. So maybe it's $16 an hour and they get a portion of the tip pool. So all of these things I think depend on the market you're in and also the customer response to what you're doing. We do not add service charge to our takeout, for example. So if you come in and buy a loaf of bread, you're not paying 20. You're just paying whatever the loaf of bread is. It's your option to leave a tip or not. At Fork, we have very few comments about the service charge because you're already spending over $100 per person. I think it's expected to pay. And so when you get the bill and it says service charge included, you're done if you want to be. Of course, we do get more gratuity than that. At High Street, on the other hand, because we have such a diverse clientele, we're at a university hospital, we have people who are patients, we have people who are destination diners, we have people who are visitors, it's very broad. We do get more comments about the service charge and whether or not it's fair or not. And of
And how do you,
course, from our team members, some people like it, some people don't. And, but the word equity means different things to different people. So some people would say that it's inequitable to allow a graduated tip pool, or it's inequitable to allow the back of the house to share in the tips. So perception is everything.
well, as you try and break the mold, it's easy to look at the existing rules in our industry, right? There's so many rules and so many traditions about how things should be done in our industry. How would you like to see the industry overall turn the tables to create a better future for all of us?
Well, I think if we want to continue to have quality team members, we have to figure out how to make the industry more professional, more stable, more, have less waves of financial instability. If it's wintertime, for example, it's dead, or, springtime, it's busy. Create a financial model. And for our own sanity and future, we need to make it a more stable, financially stable industry so that the return on investment is more rewarding, because people they give up so much to do this industry, missing holidays, missing their families, traveling, all that. It takes so much effort to make it all work. Of course, that could be said about any entrepreneurial venture. I mean, anything. I'm sure you work the same number of hours that you worked when you were a restaurateur, maybe a little bit less, but maybe you have a little bit more flexibility. But we need to get rid of that perception. People always ask me about work-life balance. How do I achieve work-life balance? Well, I love what I do. If I'm happy, then I have work-life balance. So I just want to make sure that I'm not worrying every day about whether or not I have enough for retirement, whether I have enough to support my team and grow my team. Those are the things that by solving this problem that we can help the industry.